For centuries, Egypt colonized Nubia. They called it a backwater, a source of gold and slaves and exotic animals. A land of inferior people that existed to serve the most powerful civilization on Earth. For centuries, the Nubians accepted this. Then around 744 BC, everything reversed. An African king from the south looked north at Egypt, the most famous civilization in the ancient world, and saw something that nobody else could see. He saw weakness. He saw division. He saw an empire that had forgotten what made it great. So he did what nobody expected. He marched north with his army. He conquered Egypt. He sat on the throne of the pharaohs, and he ruled the most powerful civilization in the ancient world for nearly 100 years. His name was Paye. His kingdom was Kush. And the African empire he built, stretching from the heart of Sudan all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, was the largest empire in the ancient world at that time. Today on Forgotten Empires, this is the story of the Kingdom of Kush, the African empire that conquered Egypt, made themselves pharaohs, challenged the greatest military power on earth, and then went home and built something even greater. Stay until the end, because what the Kushites did after they left Egypt is the part of the story nobody ever tells. The story of Kush begins long before the conquest of Egypt. Long before. The Kingdom of Kerma, the earliest Kushite civilization, emerged around 2500 BC on the banks of the Nile, in what is now northern Sudan. One of the earliest civilizations to develop in the Nile River Valley, Kerma built enormous mud brick temples called defufas that are among the oldest standing structures in Africa today. Substack, for 1,000 years, Kerma thrived, trading with Egypt to the north, building its own culture, its own religion, its own identity. Then around 1550 BC, Egypt invaded. The royalty of Lower Egypt rebelled, however, and Shabaka defeated them, Ashurbanipal Library Project. For 500 years, Nubia was an Egyptian province, governed by Egyptian administrators, forced to supply Egypt with gold, ivory, and enslaved people. Its own identity suppressed under Egyptian rule. But something extraordinary happened during those 500 years of occupation. The Nubians learned everything. They learned the Egyptian language. They learned Egyptian religion. They learned Egyptian military tactics. They learned how to build temples in the Egyptian style. They absorbed 5 centuries of Egyptian knowledge and culture. And then, when Egypt weakened, when the new kingdom collapsed and Egypt fractured into competing regional kingdoms, the Nubians looked at everything they had learned and decided it was time. Around 730 BCE, an army marched north from Nubia, the land south of Egypt that the pharaohs had long considered a colonial backwater. Wikipedia, the colonized had become the conquerors. The students had outgrown their teachers. And the African kingdom that Egypt had spent 5 centuries trying to control was coming north to take control of Egypt itself. The man who changed everything was King Paye. The Kushite Empire was founded when Paye, king of Kush, conquered Egypt 744 BCE. As Upper Egypt's competing kings bickered among themselves, Paye seized the opportunity to invade. Smart history. But here is what makes Paye different from every other conqueror in ancient history. He did not see himself as a conqueror. Paye didn't see his campaign as a conquest. He believed it was a holy mission for the god Amun. His forces swept north and defeated a coalition of northern Egyptian rulers. The archaeologist, he was not taking Egypt for himself. He was restoring Egypt to what it had been, healing a civilization that had forgotten its own greatness. His victory stele, a large granite slab, documents the entire campaign. The text shows that piety and strategic brilliance drove him. For example, he paused his war to celebrate a religious festival. He also expressed disgust when a defeated king's horses were found starving, calling it a violation of Ma'at. The archaeologist. Think about that. In the middle of conquering the most famous civilization on Earth, Pa stopped to observe a religious festival and expressed more outrage about starving horses than about the kings who had just surrendered to him. This was not a brutal military conqueror. This was a deeply religious and principled man who believed he was doing what the gods required of him. After his victory, Pa became pharaoh of a united Upper and Lower Egypt. He founded the 25th dynasty and created a vast empire. The archaeologist an empire that stretched from deep inside Sudan all the way to the Mediterranean coast, the largest empire in the ancient world at that time. And then Pa did something that confused the Egyptian nobility completely. He went home. Back to Napata? Back to Kush? Leaving trusted Kushite administrators to govern Egypt in his name. He had conquered the most famous empire on earth, and he went home because Egypt was not the point. Restoring the glory of Amun was the point, and that was already done. After Pa, his successors sat on the Egyptian throne and ruled as the 25th dynasty of Egypt. They reigned in part or all of ancient Egypt for nearly a century, from 744 to 656 BC. Substack history calls them the Black Pharaohs. The 25th dynasty was highly Egyptianized, using the Egyptian language and writing system as their medium of record and exhibiting an unusual devotion to Egypt's religious, artistic, and literary traditions. Substack, they did not rule Egypt as foreigners who had taken something that did not belong to them. They ruled it as its most devoted protectors. The Kushite pharaohs demonstrated how African and Egyptian cultures could integrate and thrive together, creating a unique blend of art, architecture, and religious practices. The archaeologists, they restored temples that had fallen into ruin. They rebuilt monuments that had been neglected for decades. They revived religious traditions that had been abandoned. The 25th dynasty ushered in a Renaissance period for ancient Egypt. Religion, the arts, and architecture were restored to their glorious Old, Middle, and New Kingdom forms. New World Encyclopedia. And the greatest of them all was Taharqa. He was the most powerful and famous Kushite king. His reign was the dynasty's golden age. Peace and prosperity fueled a massive building campaign, rivaling the great pharaohs of the New Kingdom. Taharqa built and restored monuments all over Egypt, including a magnificent colonnade at the Temple of Karnak. The archaeologist. His influence went far beyond Egypt. He challenged the mighty Assyrian Empire for control of the Levant. His power was so great that the Bible even mentions him as King Tirhakah, an ally to the Kingdom of Judah. The archaeologist, a Kushite African king, mentioned in the Bible, as one of the most powerful rulers in the ancient world, and history forgot his name. The greatest threat the 25th dynasty ever faced came from the east, the Neo-Assyrian Empire. The most powerful military machine the ancient world had ever seen. Iron weapons, siege machinery, a ruthlessly organized professional army. That had already conquered most of the Near East, and now it wanted Egypt. Taharqa and his army defeated the Assyrians outright in 674, according to Babylonian records. Read that again. Taharqa, the African pharaoh from Sudan, defeated the most powerful army on earth in 674 BC. The Assyrian king Esarhaddon was humiliated. He went home and spent 3 years preparing a second invasion. In 671 BC, he came back. Esarhaddon met the Kushite king Taharqa in battle, defeated him, captured his family and other Kushite and Egyptian nobles, and had them sent back to Nineveh in chains. Taharqa himself managed to escape and fled to Napata. Ashurbanipal library project, Taharqa escaped, regrouped in Kush, and immediately began planning to take Egypt back. He returned, retook Memphis, drove the Assyrians back. The Assyrians came again, and again Taharqa was forced to retreat. The last significant Kushite pharaoh, Taharqa, resisted but was ultimately forced to retreat to Kush. Wikipedia. His successor Tantamani made one final attempt. He retook Memphis briefly. The Assyrians came back for the last time. Tantamani continued to antagonize the Assyrians and was defeated by Ashurbanipal, who conquered Egypt in 676 BCE. Ashurbanipal Library Project by 656 BC. After nearly 100 years of Kushite rule, the Black Pharaohs were gone from Egypt, but they were not finished. Here's the part of this story that history never tells. When the Kushites lost Egypt, they went home to Kush, and they built something that lasted another 1,000 years. They moved their capital south from Napata to Meroe, a city on the Nile between the 5th and 6th cataracts, and they turned it into one of the most remarkable cities in the ancient world. Meroe sat at the crossroads of trade routes connecting the Mediterranean world to sub-Saharan Africa. Gold, ivory, ebony, exotic animals. Everything valuable that came from the African interior passed through Meroe on its way north. But the most extraordinary thing Kush developed at Meroe was iron. The Kushites became one of the most advanced iron-working civilizations in the ancient world. The slag heaps at Meroe, the waste products of their iron furnaces, are so enormous that early archaeologists thought they were natural hills. They were not hills. They were the physical remains of centuries of iron production that made Kush the industrial powerhouse of ancient Africa. And the women of Kush continued to rule alongside their kings. Warrior queens called Kandakes commanded armies, built temples, and were buried in pyramids equal to those of the male kings beside them. One Kandake, Amanirenas, lost an eye in battle against the Romans in 24 BC. She defeated the Roman garrison at Aswan, took the bronze head of Emperor Augustus as a trophy, buried it beneath her temple floor so that every person who entered would walk over the face of Rome. She then negotiated a peace treaty with Augustus, on her own terms, making her the only African ruler to successfully negotiate with Rome from a position of strength. The same civilization that Egypt spent centuries colonizing, the same people Egypt called a backwater, defeated Rome, negotiated with Augustus, and outlasted the Egyptian Empire by centuries. The Kingdom of Kush lasted over 3,000 years. 3,000 years. It was colonized by Egypt. It conquered Egypt. It challenged Assyria. It defeated Rome. It built more pyramids than Egypt. It developed its own writing system. It produced warrior queens who made emperors negotiate. And almost nobody knows its name. The Kingdom of Kush stands as testament to African civilizational achievement, demonstrating that sophisticated societies flourished south of the Sahara millennia before European contact. Wikipedia. The pyramids of the Kushite kings and queens still stand in the Sudanese desert today. Over 250 of them, rising from the sand, watching. A civilization that history buried under 3,000 years of silence left monuments so permanent that after everything, they are still there. If this story gave you something, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Forgotten Empires and turn on your notification bell. Next week, another story they buried. See you there.